in reality. Now, what is it that excludes? Boundaries exclude. Finitude excludes. So if boundaries and finitude exclude, then we're saying that the one unconditioned reality can't have anything in it that would exclude some conditioned reality from itself. It can't have anything in it that would exclude any set of possible boundaries from itself. Otherwise, that conditioned reality would be impossible. But inasmuch as it's a possible conditioned reality, then unconditioned reality has to be compatible with it. You kind of get that? So if an unconditioned reality would have to be compatible with it, unconditioned reality itself must be compatible with every conditioned reality in order to make that conditioned reality exist, in order to fulfill ultimately its conditions, then that unconditioned reality can't have any set of boundaries in it that would exclude it from grounding any possible conditioned reality. Now, let's go up the tree of being. Now we're getting very close to what St. Thomas Aquinas was trying to tell us. Because St. Thomas, remember, he equated this with an unconditioned reality. He literally equated this with pure acting power, pure being, ipsum suum esse subsistens, act itself. Now, just take this principle of simplicity for just a moment. Remember, finites exclude. Lack of boundaries, lack of finitude means the reality is inclusive and compatible with everything else. Let's just go up the tree of being. Can an unconditioned reality be a wave? No, it couldn't, because waves exclude particles. If the unconditioned reality were a wave, then particles could not exist. So, of course, the unconditioned reality, which is ultimately grounding the existence of all conditioned realities, would have to be simpler, higher on the tree of being than, of course, either waves or particles. Well, maybe then the unconditioned reality, just maybe, it's an electron. That's it. The unconditioned reality is like no, it couldn't be, because there are these protons, and the protons exist too, and electrons and protons exclude one another in the same. So you couldn't have the unconditioned reality having electron boundaries. It couldn't have proton boundaries, because then it exclude electrons. So it'd have to be simpler still. Oh, I get it. Maybe the unconditioned reality, maybe it is really, maybe it's a unified field. Maybe it's higher than an electromagnetic field. Maybe the unconditioned reality is what unifies the gravitational field with the electromagnetic field, and it's a unified. No, it still have to be higher still. And what about the unconditioned reality? Well, it'd have to have something that get in a conscious field, a self-conscious field, and a unified field. And then it'd have to be higher still. In fact, what we begin to see is that the unconditioned reality would have to be higher than anything which could be a reality. Anything which could be a reality. Because anything which can be real would ultimately have to be dependent on or equal to an unconditioned reality. Dependent on or equal to an unconditioned reality. Therefore, the unconditioned reality has got to be higher still. It's got to be higher than any reality, any possible reality that we can think of. Now, if that unconditioned reality is higher than any possible reality, then it has to be simpler than anything that is. So if you look at your diagram for a second, it's not simply that it's simpler than everything up to the unified field or even to a mentative field or higher. Actually, it has to be simpler than anything which has any boundary. Because you see, if something has a boundary, if something actually has something which differentiates it from something else, then there could be that real something else. Whatever it is that is going to be absolutely simple, that's going to be compatible with every single reality, can't have any boundary that reality would have. In short, it would have to be up at the top of the tree of being. In short, the unrestricted reality, since it has to be simpler, since it has to be inclusive, of everything dependent on it, that reality would have to be compatible with every single possible reality, including itself. Now, if that's the case, then it's at the top of the tree of being. It's absolutely simple. It's like saying when we get to the top, we can only ask one question. We get to, I don't know, the superfield. Does the superfield have anything different from itself in it? Does the superfield, is there any non-superfield that can exist in reality? And if there is some non-superfield that can exist in reality, you still have to go higher on the tree of being until you get to the absolute point where there is absolutely nothing else which can be differentiated from it on its own level. It has no intrinsic or extrinsic boundary at all. And that is the most remarkable thing about this unconditioned reality. Let's review for just 2 points, because right now you're right at the point of seeing that this absolutely simple reality, it's the same thing to say it's an unconditioned reality. Point number 1, an unconditioned reality cannot exclude anything from itself, any possible reality from itself. So it has to be, right, simpler and simpler. It has to be simpler than any possible reality. You just have to keep going up the tree of being until you get to the point where there is no reality simpler than it. What's that? That's absolute simplicity. Because if there is a reality that is less simple than it, then the unconditioned reality would still have to be simpler than it, and it would have to be, therefore, higher on the tree of being. The only thing that the unconditioned reality can be, in order to be compatible with itself and everything else which is dependent upon it, in order not to exclude anything from itself and be absolute and have everything else dependent on it, that would have to be then a reality which was absolutely simple. Now, what is it to say that a reality is absolutely simple? What does that mean? It means, essentially, that it has no boundaries at all. If it's simple enough to be compatible with everything dependent upon it, including itself, if it's that simple, if it's at the top of the tree of being, then, of course, it can have no boundary at all. Because that's exactly what it means to be absolutely simple. To have no excluding property. To be purely inclusive. To not have anything in it which could exclude some possible reality from itself. In other words, this being is unrestricted. This being is infinite. Now, I don't mean infinite here in the sense of like an infinite magnitude or an infinite Euclidean plane. You remember when you were learning geometry and you learned that Euclid's plane could keep on going on and on and on and on. And of course, when you saw that, you thought, well, maybe infinity really means keep on going. Or we talked about an infinite series, and we're going to talk about an infinite series again in the Hilbertian kinds of proofs. But again, with an infinite series, we're not talking about this here. We say infinite when we're talking about absolutely simple. What we really are saying is it has no intrinsic or extrinsic boundary which could exclude any possible reality from itself, so that it can be compatible with every reality that could be dependent upon it, including, of course, being compatible with itself, to itself. Now, if that's the case, then how do we conceive of this infinity? We're right back to St. Thomas Aquinas' little difficulty. You don't want to try to imagine this kind of infinity, because the minute you give it an image, the minute you picture think it, what do? You stick a boundary on it. So all you can say is that reality, which is the unconditioned reality, that reality which is absolutely simple because it has to be consistent with everything that is,